It is my great pleasure to open the very last session of this rich conference. It was very beneficial, very influential speakings and discussions. So today we have actually it is a continuation of the previous session on the Kyoto School and Nishida. We have two very energetic and sympathetic speakers, young scholars of Bergson speaking on energetism and sympathy. The first one, the first speaker is Alessandra CAMPO. She is a postdoctoral research fellow in theoretical philosophy at the University of L'Aquila in Italy. She has studied the metaphysical and cosmological implications of Freudian Lacanian theory in relation with philosophy and psychoanalysis, using Bergson, Whitehead, and Deleuze. And recently, her research is devoted to Kantian philosophy with reference to metaphysical causal link. She is already author of, apart from articles and book chapters, two monographs in Italian. One is Fantasma e Sensazione, Lacan con Kant, and the other one, Tarde Vita, Freud, dopo Lacan. And these were published by Mimesis. And just now, she is waiting for a publication as a co-editor with Simon Gozone. And the book will be on Einstein versus Bergson, an enduring quarrel on time. This is actually coming out on Monday, this Monday. And she must be excited. And yesterday's Korean scholar talking on Bergson and Einstein, she needs to immediately buy this book. And of course, all of us as well. And today, Alessandra is going to talk on Bergson's accomplished mysticism and Nishida's energeticism, an example of common intuition. Yes, the floor is yours, Alessandra.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you for the kind presentation. And can I share my screen? Okay, can you see it? Yes, can you see it?
No?
Not
yet.
Not yet.
It says it's starting, but
give me a sign, please, when you see it.
no, it's
okay.
No, it's not.
Okay, so forgive me because it's only a draft, so references are not formally written. It's only a draft, just to let you follow me better, maybe. So as the title of my talk suggests, today I would like to discuss the affinity between the accomplished mysticism, which is at the core of Bergson's two sources of morality and religion, and the energetism codified by Nishida in the third part of his inquiry on the good. In this regard, I think we can speak of a community of intuition. Unfortunately, I've not been able to find by myself any information about Nishida's reading of the two sources. But whether Nishida read or read not this book of Bergson does not really matter, because energetism, from the Greek energeia, activity, is the term with which Nishida qualified his ethics long before 1932. In the inquiry on the good, it is true, there are no direct references to Bergson, but we find a lot of minor Bergsonian ideas. By minor, I mean that there is no mention neither of élan vital nor of durée, the major concepts of Bergsonism. Nishida analyzed them in other works, agreeing with Bergson on the fact that the universe is the manifestation of a single creative force, which acts at ergo, from behind. Nishida presents it as a living axiom or root, ri in Japanese, that unifies and differentiates everything without pause. And there is nothing, both for Nishida and Bergson, which is not grounded on it. For both, there is a single reality or God, which is common to all beings, and its vision, says a very Cousinian Bergson, would involve everywhere the immediate abolition of the war. The minor Bergsonian ideas we find in the inquiry are that the inner experience has a qualitative character, that we cannot analyze it by reflection, and that intuition as a direct access to inner life is not different in nature from the ordinary acts of consciousness. Intuition is a refinement of them. It inserts itself into perception by extending it until that level where there is no more distinction between the object and the subject. For both Nishida and Bergson, intuition is a supplementary attention that the spirit pays to itself, the effort by which it tests its unifying power and that consciousness feels as a tension of the will. There are further affinities, but since they allow me to argue in favor of a community of intuition between Bergson, a complicit mysticism, a mysticism in which action completes contemplation, and Nishida energetism, I will proceed with the argument, hoping to convince you. At first, in fact, one might disagree with my hypothesis, at least for two reasons. My hypothesis is that Bergson's mysticism is an energetism, because the former is a practical and, in this sense, dynamic religion, while the latter is a religious practice or ethic. Both are models of emancipation insofar as both are experiences of freedom. Freedom, for both Bergson and Nishida, is a development of our deep self, une création de soi par soi, by which, moving from what is, we become what we are. The free act expresses our deep self like a painting or a music example made by both of them to illustrate it, expresses the self of the artist who made them. The paradigm of the free act is the pianist's hand moving by itself, namely an automatism, because freedom for both Nishida and Bergson is not a matter of free choice. To be free is to be active starting from one's own inner nature, and so to be passive with respect to it. The condition of freedom is a sympathy with this nature, namely intuition, but the condition of intuition is an inward migration, the desertion of the individual, the false or the superficial self, in favor of an immersion in the person, the fundamental one. Yet, in reality, intuition is this same immersion, a conversion of the attention whose condition is the immanence of the deep self to the superficial one, ever present as a background melody or radiation. Now, the first reason for objection, I think, is the following. To say that mysticism is an energetism is to say that the mystical experience is an experience of freedom, but Bergson in the two sources does not speak of freedom, not at least directly, as he did in the essay on the immediate data of consciousness. Yet, not only does the opposition between closed and open, static and dynamic recalls the opposition between superficial and deep, spatial and temporal of the essay. In 1889, Bergson expressly employs the term static and dynamic to describe the two ways of assimilating the antecedents of an act, one mechanical and the other creative. For Bergson, mysticism is an appeal to the inner and deep life. Mystical action derives from it, and as such is a free action that frees in turn. The hot beats of generosity that mystic light, to take up the beautiful image from La Conscience et la Vie, are hot beats of freedom. Bergson, it is true, says that mystics are rare and exceptional, but in the essay, also freedom is said to be rare and exceptional. Moreover, rare and exceptional for Bergson do not mean exclusive. We can all encounter God in the same way that we can all perform a free act, an act which, right in La Conscience et la Vie, Bergson compares to the moral action because, like this, it springs from the fundamental impulse of life. After all, in the two sources, Bergson is quite explicit. I'll quote him, in each of us, there is a mystic slumbering and waiting for an opportunity to awaken. For souls who are predisposed, a simple sign or suggestion is enough. The mystic is this man or woman sign, a man or woman affordance, size in which everybody can find the strength to feel his or her own deep life and strive to bring it to expression. Mystics, to recall the conclusions of the two sources, are the supplement of soul that stimulate intuition as supplementary attention in other people, increases that generates increases. Indeed, for Bergson, mystical experience is an experience of the limit within the limit of our experience, therefore within the reach of all. That it is an experience of the limit depends on the fact that the self, like God, becomes perceptible at the limit of consciousness, namely at the limit of the imaginary. This is also reiterated by Nishida in his inquiry. That the limit of this experience is the limit of our experience instead depends on the fact that the mystic is a human being, albeit an extraordinary one. Then we can say that Bergson's mysticism is a generalized mysticism, and energetism, according to my hypothesis, is precisely this ordinary or everyday mysticism, to use Michel de Certeau's adjective. For Nishida, we can all develop our deep self, and the deep self is not the ego, but a degree of God. This last consideration may prevent what could be the second objection to my hypothesis. Energetism is not a mysticism because Nishida does not deal with mysticism, mostly identifying it with esotericism. Energetism is an ethic, therefore not a religious phenomenon, but a practice whose aim is the good or happiness of the individual. Yet, not only energetism is a religious ethic, whose aim is the good or happiness of the individual. Yet not only energetism is a religious ethic, since its aim is the development of the individual self, and the individual self is a part of the divine self. For Nishida, religion is about the relationship between human beings and God. Besides, the religious need is a need for the self, whereby I'm quoting Nishida, but I translated, I'm sorry, for the self grasps its relative and limited being while desiring eternal life through the union with an infinite force. The need for the self is the need for a great life, a need that we cannot stop even if we want, because it serves God is infinite. Finally, like mysticism, energetism demands a reform of life, to summarize which Nishida chooses the words of St. Paul: I do not live, Christ lives in me. And we should not be surprised, I think, by this Christian reference, because the reform which is at stake in Nishida energetism is the same that for Bergson Christian mystics have achieved. So, if mystics are moral heroes are religious spirits, and Bergson, as most of you know, is very interested in this heroism, that is, in the actions of the mystics rather than in their words. Before considering mysticism as a religious phenomenon, Bergson is interested in its transformative power. The mystic is an accelerator of humanity's progress, and progress means divinization. The experience to which mystics testify is a contact with the vital impulse which, for Bergson, does not belong to God, but is God himself. Their transsecular agreement is the best proof of its existence, a proof that mysticism offers to philosophy and that philosophy should take into account. Nishida agrees. Only the immediate and internal experience proves God's existence because its existence is not only a philosophical question, but the real of the spiritual experience, what is real in the practice. Mysticism from Bergson says nothing to those who have not experienced it. The contact with God is an intuition, but intuition is an affective act. Intuition proves the existence of God because it does not come from the subject, being, on the contrary, the way in which the activity of the object affirms itself in that of the subject. But this affirmation is an affection. Mystics feel God. The mystical state is a theopathic state. The object imposes itself in an intimate impression that is ungraspable by the intelligence and yet penetrable with all senses. It is ungraspable by the intelligence because in the immediate or pure state of experience, reflection is not active. It is penetrable with all senses because the abolition of the distinction between the subject and the object generates an emotion that warms and absorbs the soul, says Bergson. Bergson and Nishida agree on its identity. It is joy, the affect that accompanies life's success and certifies progress. It is joy, the effect that proves that God is, lives, and acts in us. Now, I think we can better understand why for Bergson mystical experience is a metaphysical experience, like the one described in Introduction to Metaphysics. Like the latter, the former is an integral experience that involves the whole person, overcoming the limit of human condition. Mystics are more than human, and are such precisely because they act. Action, at least a certain kind of action, is not human. It transforms human life, because for this purpose, contemplation is not enough, according to Bergson. Ecstasy is dull. Only in the action the human will merge with the divine will. Mere contemplation is sterile, autoerotic, egoistic. Its verbal account can generate doubts, or what is worse, remain unbelieved. Nishida says that intuition is not a conjecture. Action is certain, it guarantees, because Bergson, like mystics, is wary of the spoken word, but not of the completed work. And completion is also central for Nishida. The perfect activity, Nishida quotes Aristotle, is the entelecheia, the same activity that Bergson in the essay metaphorizes as the falling of an overripe fruit from the tree, thus metaphorizing also the free act. Mystics are practically guided by God's will, and therefore their action succeeds in intensifying the fraternity between humans. The mystic, in fact, is a new species composed of a unique individual who loves humanity because he or her loves and is loved by the love from which humanity comes. God is love and the object of love. For Bergson, the whole contribution of mysticism consists in this. Nishida agrees. The spirit of humanity is one, and the good act is love, because love is the feeling of a union not only between human beings, but also between them and their works, between them and nature. Love, that is God, is the common root of heaven and earth. Mysticism grasps it, because by loving us, says Nishida, God allows us to return to him. Love for Bergson is both a person and a creative power. And so, since for both Nishida and Bergson, God is love, we can say, I think, that a complicit mysticism is a philosophical Christology, a sort of shamanism, while energetism is a cosmic personalism. Both are integral humanism, not in spite of being panpsychism, but precisely because they are. The humanity transfigured by the action of the mystic is a shared humanity, because transfiguration is a warming of its common ground. The closet and the static are generated by the cooling of an incandescence, and mystics, for Bergson, burst into society like a jet of lava, putting back into motion what no longer drags. To transfigure does not mean to abolish. To transfigure means to relativize what is current to a small stage on a larger path. Mystics illuminate this path by inaugurating an itinerary, because the absolute can only be experienced through an additional place, namely through a deviation from what we already know about it. Thanks to the mystical action, says Bergson, the materials of intelligence come into fusion and then solidify into new ideas, informed by the spirit itself. The dynamic, I think, is very similar to that of scientific revolution, according to Thomas Kuhn. Mystics breaks paradigm, and Bergson is bewitched by their ability to tread the world by embodying the creative force of the elan in their works. Mystics take it forward and let it intervene directly. In a way, then, they refine the vital impulse into spiritual energy by placing themselves at the point where, with intuition, they feel that the impulse would have wanted to arrive. Mystics continued, thus also prolonging its divine action. Mystics, in fact, are only instruments in the hands of God, and Nishida agrees again. The good act asks us to become objects, because those people, I'm quoting Nishida, those people who are able to move other people, even after they have been dead for a long time, should have had a very objective spirit. But Bergson, as you know, is also bewitched by the charisma of mystics, and in general of prophets and great interpreters. All those people whose words are foundational, all those who persuade, influence, and engrave the soul of people around them. Nishida compares intuition to a perfect engraving. There is a call, something that echoes in their speeches, the one great creative emotion from which we all come. Mystics interpret it for us, and this is the reason why, according to Bergson, they attract like magnets. The force of their attraction is proportional to the intensity of the super intellectual emotion they release. Their mere presence sets other people in motion because mysticism itself is a return to motion. Therefore, as Bergson says, mystics have only to exist, only to show themselves. If mystics are examples, they are examples without a model. Yet, if their heroic furor spreads like a fire, Bergson does not quote, maybe doesn't know Giordano Bruno, but the mystic, I think, is a furious in a very Brunian sense. So if the heroic furor spreads like a fire, it is because although mystics don't have a model, they are models for other people. And it would be nice, I think, to relate Bergson considerations on their exemplarism to Nietzsche considerations on the positive role of a certain monumental history. Yet mystics inspire only because they are inspired. Mystics, says Bergson, are like musicians who make people dance, having themselves dance. The energy they inject in society is the same energy they receive, but they receive energy not because they consciously want to. Mystics receive energy because energy wants them and because they say yes to this will. Mystics open themselves to the wave that flows in the death of everyone, a flow that through their person gains other people. Mystics are conductors, agents of propaganda and of propagation. The message they receive is a truth to be made. And this is the essential for Bergson. The mystical imperative is a call to action that compels like an inclination one does not want to resist. Nishida says something similar. The good is rational, but reason is strength. Strength is person is joy. When we are possessed by the good, explains Nishida, the tendency of our will is spontaneously dominated by a law that forces us with the imperative authority of an incomparable power, but this authority is only a side of the good. The other one is its natural pleasantness. Mystics, in fact, neither command nor obey because they are beyond the two senses in which, for Bergson, power is set. Mystics act because they are self-confident and self-assured, but they are so because they feel that something in themselves overcomes them, and because the need to expand it is a surge of love. This security makes mystics see no obstacles. They see simply, say Bergson, and if they throw themselves into complication, it is simply because they don't see them. Mystics enjoy an acquired innocence that does not generate knowledge, because nobody can capitalize in notions on the encounter of God, with God. Active and acted at the same time, mystics drag because they are dragged, blindly dragged, like the pianist end. Bergson says that they are active towards other people because they are passive towards God. And Nishida agrees. We dominate only what we follow. For both, freedom coincide with divine activity, because when the subject and the object are mutually forgotten, all that remains is activity. Intuition is the consciousness of an act, but the consciousness of an act is an act, just as the consciousness of a breath is a breath, and the consciousness of a light is a light. The act is not a fact, and it's by arguing about its unpredictability that in the third chapter of the essay, Bergson says that the only way we have to predict someone's behavior is to behave like that someone. If we want to predict someone's behavior, we have to be, namely to act like that someone. Nishida just repeats, to be soku to power, to think soku to act. To know something is to become it. Thus, the completion of ecstasy with action is not an option. To see the good for both Nishida and Bergson is to do it. If one does not do it, as the mystic Socrates has already guessed, it is because one has not seen it. The act ratifies the encounter with the divine, because God, says Bergson, is like a music listening to which one cannot but dance. The impulse is creative, and to coincide with it is to create. Again, the community of intuition is evident. For Bergson, thanks to the energy spread by mysticism, we can understand each other directly. Nishida translates, to attend to what is beyond distinction is to be and to live without distinctions. Our true self is the substance of the universe, and when we grasp it, we agree with the good of humanity and with God's will. The energetism good coincides with the realization of the person, but the person is not the ego. Our person is the beginning of the activity of the unifying force of the universe, a constantly active trans-individual energy. Thus, to realize ourselves is to become one with this force, because the relationship between the world and God is the same as the relationship between the phenomena of consciousness and their unification. Like Bergson, Nishida admits that the essence of life is psychic, namely that the phenomena of consciousness are, as he says, the only reality, and that the unifying force within us is the same for everything in nature. In this sense, I think that energetism is an ethology, to borrow the term used by Deleuze to describe Spinoza's ethics, from whose model Nishida draws so much inspiration. Then the very good act is a private action whose effects are immediately public. It stems from the development of the self to culminate in the development of the great person of the humankind. Then, if we realize ourselves, we become indispensable elements in the evolution of the universe. For both Bergson and Nishida, in fact, a society progresses when its individuals fully act and develop their talents. Individualism does not mean egoism. Individualism means communitarianism. The so-called peculiarities of individuals are only variations of a larger consciousness, only ripples of a single great wave. We do not create our deep needs, says Nishida. They come from God, but since God is the living root of the universe, to satisfy them is immediately to satisfy those of the universe. As soon as we express the self externally, the love for humankind is spontaneously generated, because Atman, Soku Brahman, psychology, Soku ecology. In Nishida energetism, the good is an ideal, namely a need of the consciousness which is greater and more powerful than the others. But since also for Nishida, our consciousness begins with impulse and ends with will, the good is the full fulfillment of the will. The will is the fundamental act of unification of the self, the immediate manifestation of the unifying force in which reality is root. Nishida claims that the will is the deepest trans-individual act of consciousness. Therefore, the ideal we feel as an inner need is the need for the will's highest expression. Even for Bergson, however, idealism is not foreign to mysticism. In 1913, after his trip to the United States, Bergson evokes an idealism that verges on mysticism and which is always strongly impregnated with feeling. Almost the same words were pronounced in his speech to the France-Amerique Committee in 1917, and again in praise of American activism and efficiency. By idealism, in fact, Bergson means the habit of considering life not just as if it was simply made to be lived, but as if its objects and raison d'être were the realization of something that does not yet exist and that, once realized, will give life a richer content and a new meaning. For Bergson, the American patriotism of the time reveals the feeling of a mission to be accomplished, and which is the same as Socrates, to achieve democracy. Like the mystic Socrates, Americans orient their entire existence towards the democratic ideals. Entire because when the greatest achievement is at stake, the greatest effort is requested. Indeed, in order to consent to the will of the daimon, that is, in order to respond to the call of a power that is not ours, we must deprive ourselves of everything that would prevent the God function or the democracy function, Nishida's energeia, from realizing itself through us. We must, says Bergson dalle deux sources, eliminate everything that is not sufficiently pure, resistant, and ductile for God to use it. Nature attaches us to life with instinct, And the Bergson of the two sources is also very supernumerarian. But life, individual life, is not everything. In mysticism, as in democracy, it is a matter of going further. And when we are further, says Bergson, the comforts we enjoy at home becomes inconveniences. They turn into cumbersome baggage. Nishida agrees, we must die to the desires of this world to meet God. The greatest human beings are great insofar as they don't have an ego, because we only experience the great spirit of the universe in our consciousness after throwing our ego away. It is difficult to do it, but Bergson says that to the soul that completes intuition in action, to the soul that is worthy of this effort, it is enough to feel that its personality is fully absorbed by a being which is infinitely more powerful than itself, like the iron by the fire that redominates. That is why not all of us imitate mystics, although we all feel we must do it. Not all of us imitate mystics because the most of us is afraid of being burnt. We all feel we must do it because although we lose much close to the sacred fire, says Nishida, we all intuit that it is to acquire everything. Thank you for the attention.